Sorry, I got cut off there on the last video. So this will be a part 2 of it. But yes, as I was saying, no matter how many dark arts that we do, or what we conjure up, or how we come up with, trying to compete and do a similar act, it's not going to touch God's followers, right? His vessels. And that's the thing, is like going back to Moses and Exodus. Moses was human, so of course if hail was being sent on him, or lice or locusts or whatever, he would have to deal with those things from a human perspective, of course, just like Pharaoh and the Egyptians had to. They were all human, right? But do you really think that if God is sending Moses, especially someone who's saying, I don't know if I'm up for this, I don't know if this is, if I'm the right one for the job, do you think that God isn't going to shelter and protect Moses from that, right? So that's the thing, is like, your opposers, your enemies, those who work for Satan, and even Satan, they know that as long as God has appointed the person, the vessel, that none of these attacks are going to hit the same to them as they do to them, right? So as they say, it hits different, right? It hits them different as it would hit you. So God sent them the poverty and lack energy first off, right? The lack spirit. And they went through that. And so they in turn tried to send that towards you as a tit for tat kind of a thing, and for Satan to try to show God, look what I'm doing to your Moses. Look what I'm doing to you. Not only am I disobeying you, but I'm competing with you, and I'm copying you, and I'm attacking your vessel, right? So anyways, that was pretty much the word for the most part anyhow. So I hope that this made some sense. And so if throughout 2023, again, in summary, if throughout 2023 you were feeling like you were being copied and mimicked, the things that you were doing, they were trying to copy and mimic you. But the difference was that you had the grace of the Lord and the strength of the Lord guiding you and leading you, just like he used towards Moses. So therefore they can't copy that, right? Satan was leading them. So therefore, if Satan's leading them, how are they able to copy and mimic God's light on you, God's glory? They cannot, obviously, right? And how can they compete with that? They can't. So therefore, whatever you may have went through this year of 2023, say maybe you did go through some losses, or maybe you were going through isolation, or some confusion here and there, or some strikes against your children or your family, or some poverty, or I guarantee you that it was just a tip compared to what God had sent towards them. So again, using numbers, if God had sent a poverty spirit towards them that was, say, an 8 or 9, the spirit that God allowed to hit you was more like a 2 or 3 in comparison. Now, if you were being obedient to the Lord, it would probably be a 2 or 3, and maybe not even touch you at all, depending, right? But if you weren't being obedient to the Lord imagine if the Lord's trying to use Moses, and Moses is defying God, he's sinning, you know what I mean? He's running away like Jonah, you know what I mean? Well, then maybe, God would have allowed these things to come and knock on your door in a stronger way, right? But if maybe there were some hiccups along the way, which God expects that. There were hiccups with Moses too, right? God expects there to be some hiccups when it comes to us, because he knows we're human. But if for the most part you were just trying to get on the program with God, you were trying to foster your relationship with the Lord, and trying to turn away from sins, and just trying to make so if throughout your year you saw advancement, like again, say in January you were at a level 1 with the Lord, and by mid-year you were at a level 6 or 7, and here you are wrapping up the year at a level 9 or 10, well, then you've made advancements throughout the year looking back, right? And if that was the story for you, then you can maybe identify with this word and see how, yes, some of those quote unquote plagues did touch me here and there, but if I look back, the times that it touched me were times that maybe I was being more disobedient, or I was lacking in my focus with the Lord, right? And that maybe you can also see that maybe if you became aware of it, if the Lord told you and you were aware of that this was the enemy doing this was the work of the enemy, then you got strong and focused again, you recalibrated with the Lord, then maybe you saw how, it started to fizzle off, right? And so the Lord was basically the Lord was using you on a mission, and he used you like Moses to go to Pharaoh and the Egyptians, aka your enemies and opposers, but it was basically God going to Satan, and they should have just relented. They should have just obeyed and listened like you did, right? And then they wouldn't have had to suffer throughout these plagues throughout this year. So if you think that your enemies have gotten off scot-free and stuff and everything's roses and butterflies, I'm saying no, it's not. Even if you're not fully aware of it, it's not, because the Lord's given me this word to say no. Throughout this year, he has sent them spirits of sickness, spirits of striking against their children, spirit of poverty, lack spirit of depression and mental affliction, spirits of isolation, spirits of defamation, confusion. I can go on and on. He sent all of these towards your enemy. So if maybe in ways, who knows, maybe because everybody's situation is different, if maybe you were aware of, like, say you heard somehow, some way that some of your enemies were suffering or going through a hard time, maybe, they lost their job. That was from God. Maybe they were now homeless, that was from God. Maybe now their reputation is being ruined. Maybe in 2021 and 2022, they were flying high, and all of a sudden you hear or see somehow that maybe they've been, humbled in many different ways, right? That was from the Lord. And so you might not have thought God was doing much because maybe you yourself had suffered throughout the year a loss here or a loss there, or maybe a sickness, or maybe, one of your children got sick, or maybe you were suffering through some poverty, right? That is nothing compared to A, what they went through, and B, what they were trying to copy and mimic and compete and send back your way. Right? And if you did feel any of these plagues in a higher capacity, it was most likely due to you yourself not obeying the Lord, right? Not doing his will. Just like what would have happened if Moses wasn't doing his will. Look what happened with Jonah when he wasn't doing the Lord's will. The Lord wanted to use Jonah, right? And they threw Jonah overboard and he got swallowed by the whale. And then after all that, he went and did the Lord's will. So that's the thing, is if maybe you did find yourself, being through some difficulties or whatnot, it was probably because you were following God's will in one way or another, right? But perhaps if you became aware of that and you reset yourself and you repented, then the Lord cleaned things up for you, right? So it's just like with your enemies and these Egyptians. Had they have just done the Lord's will, then they wouldn't have had to suffer these plagues. So the ultimate lesson here is that whether the Lord is using you like he used Moses, or he's not necessarily using you, and if you're working for Satan and he's coming and saying, if you're working for Satan and God comes and says to you, hey, do A, B, C, you better do A, B, C. Because if you try to disobey him or challenge him like Pharaoh did, then you will fall under wrath, aka plagues, right? And if the Lord has chosen you and he's trying to use you as a vessel, and if you're not obedient, then he will do to you like he did to Jonah and find creative ways to get your obedience in the long run. And at the end of the day, after the Lord sent the final plague towards the Egyptians, which was the death of the firstborn, that broke Pharaoh. It took 10 plagues for him to finally, and the loss of the firstborn child, to say, okay, all right, you win, I will let the people go, right? And then of course it goes into more from there. It goes into how the Lord parted the Red Sea and how it swallowed up Pharaoh and his army and all that. But the Lord doesn't want me to really talk about that. And of course you can read the book of Exodus yourself and get the whole story. He just wants me to focus on this little part about how, because like with me, I knew that the enemy was trying to attack me throughout the year with some of these plagues. And here and there, some of them did land on me, not to the degree that they wanted them to, not to the degree that they expected. And the Lord did inform me that it was from the enemy. And in some of the circumstances, I too was out of order and will with the Lord. However, in some of the other circumstances, I wasn't. And you can best believe I was like Moses, where I was like, okay, what? Like, I'm doing your will here. I'm working for you, and I'm having to go through A, B, C. You know what I mean? But like how the Lord explained it to me, and like it was with Moses, he had to use that hardship so that I could learn the lesson, right? And that's how the Lord teaches us. So in some circumstances, it might have just been, say you were doing everything correctly according to the Lord, maybe it was to try to teach you something. And say if maybe perhaps you can admit and swallow pride and say that you were out of will or out of order with the Lord, then that's why it was due to disobedience, right? But if you were, for the most part, doing the Lord's will like Moses was, and you were being an obedient follower, and throughout the year you were graduating in your relationship with him, then you best believe he wasn't allowing 80-90% of these attacks to hit you. And if he did, it was in a softer way than what the enemy had intended. And on the other side of things, if you felt that the Lord wasn't working on your behalf or covering you, yes, he was. He was sending these so-called plagues towards your enemies. So whether you're privy to it or not, this is what the Lord is telling me is what was going on behind the scenes throughout the duration of 2023. So if you had felt that there was like a copying, mimicking spirit throughout the year, yes, there was. It was the enemy trying to hit you with what the Lord was hitting them with originally. And Satan was trying to put it on a human level. He was trying to pit his followers against God's followers. But at the end of the day, the battle was truly between God and Satan. And we know, look what happened back in Exodus days. Satan tried to pick a battle with God back then too, using Pharaoh and Moses. And at the end of the day, Moses was fine, Pharaoh suffered plagues, and eventually let the people go, which he just should have done in the first place because it was worse on him in the long run, right? So it's the same thing. None of what your enemy did against you prospered and prevailed, thanks to the Lord. And the Lord was working on your behalf by showing, no, I know that maybe you don't think that I chose this Moses. I know that you see, Moses sees why I shouldn't have picked him, and you see why I shouldn't have picked him, but I'm proving to you throughout all these acts and plagues that he's the one I chose. So whether you think he's fit for duty or not, he doesn't think he's fit for duty, but here he is. You don't think he's fit for duty. Okay, that's nice. Here he is. And the Lord sheltered and covered Moses because of such, and because Moses was obedient to doing the Lord's work on his behalf, right? And because Pharaoh was disobedient, the Lord sent the plagues. And at the end of the day, these plagues didn't affect Moses. They didn't affect God. And Pharaoh and the Egyptians suffered, And at the end, they let the people go. Why? Because God always wins. No matter what, right? So that's the thing. So anyway, I hope this helps somebody. I hope you understood what I was trying to say, because I am like Moses, where I have a stuttering problem and I'm not too eloquent with my words at times, like Moses tried to argue to God about, right? But God wasn't hearing it, was he? Right? And he doesn't hear it with me either. So anyway, if you have found yourself in a Moses type position where, in whatever way it may be, you didn't feel that you were fit for the duty and the mission that the Lord had laid out for you, rest assured that you are. Otherwise, because God knows what he's doing at all times, he wouldn't have chose you. And your enemies, they didn't think you were fit for the position either. But God has shown them throughout this entire year of 2023 that not only are you fit for the position, but that he's going to cover you from their competing and copying acts, dark arts that they send towards you, right? And that his will be done no matter what at the end of the day, no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, right? And so I hope it brought you some encouragement and some comfort to know that whether you were knowing of it or not, your enemies have suffered throughout this year of 2023. They did go through these plagues, just like Pharaoh and his Egyptians suffered throughout the book of Exodus, right? And that the Lord did cover and shelter you from a lot of things, because he sent at least 10 plagues towards them, and you best believe they sent all 10 back towards you using these dark arts. They were trying to go tit for tat with God all along the way. But like we already said, if you were on the straight and narrow with the Lord, these attacks and plagues never even hit you. And if they did, it was for your own good. And if they did, it was a soft hit compared to what they really wanted them to do. And so just rest assured that these plagues hit your opposers like an 8 to 10 out of 10, and they hit you like a 3 or a 4 max. So if you were going through some sort of loss, their loss was worse. If you were going through some sort of lack spirit or something, their lack spirit was worse. Because I would rather work for God and be hit by the enemy than work for the enemy and have God going against me, right? I would rather be on the light team taking some hits than be on the dark team taking God's hits. And as we know, all these plagues originally came from the Lord. So Pharaoh was not capable of doing these plagues, on his own. He might have thought, oh, well, look at me, I can turn a stick to a snake. Okay, but you're not able to do what God can do. Like, turning a stick into a snake was nothing for God. That was just like a snap of a finger. That was easy peasy, right? So that's the thing, is your enemies thinking that they can hit you the same with their dark arts and working for Satan than God can hit is just absolutely ludicrous. And it proves that they're still under this confusion delusion plague that God sent them originally. It's still affecting them. Because if they think that they can disobey God and thumb their nose at God and thumb their nose at his representative, at his Moses, and then think that they can use Satan's quote-unquote powers to attack back, and that's going to stick the same as it, they're like, no, they're still under confusion and delusion. So anyways, without it getting too long, I hope this blesses you. If you have any questions on this word, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comment section. I will try to explain as best I can. But please just read Exodus, starting chapter 7. Well, read the whole thing, but if you're wanting to get your own confirmations from the Lord on this, it was starting from chapter 7 and on. And then it goes into the plagues. So I hope this made sense. And yes, God bless.